They handed Chuck Berry a guitar at school. What he did next was unbelievable. This is the incredible true story of October 12, 1944, when a shy 18-year-old Chuck Berry first touched a guitar during music class at Sumner High School in St. Louis, and how what happened in the next 3 minutes would change not just his life, but the entire future of popular music forever. It was a crisp autumn morning at Sumner High School, one of the few high-quality schools available to African American students in segregated St. Louis. Chuck Berry was in his senior year, a quiet, intelligent young man who had shown more interest in literature and mechanics than music. His classmates knew him as someone who was good with his hands. He could fix radios, work on cars, and had a natural understanding of how things worked. But nobody, including Chuck himself, had any idea that he possessed an extraordinary musical gift. The discovery happened during what was supposed to be a routine music appreciation class taught by Mrs. Julia Davis, a passionate educator who believed that every student should have exposure to musical instruments, even if the school's budget for arts education was practically non-existent. Mrs. Davis had managed to acquire a single acoustic guitar for the school's music program, a battered but playable instrument that had been donated by a local music store. She had been trying for weeks to find students who might be interested in learning to play, but in a school where most students were focused on practical subjects that might lead to stable employment, musical pursuits were often seen as luxurious distractions. That October morning, Mrs. Davis had decided to try a different approach. Instead of asking for volunteers, she was going to hand the guitar to different students and simply ask them to hold it, to feel what it was like to have a musical instrument in their hands. Chuck Berry was sitting in the third row, middle seat, when Mrs. Davis approached with the guitar. He had been half listening to her lecture about different types of musical instruments. His mind partly focused on a car engine problem he'd been trying to solve for a neighbor. "Charles," Mrs. Davis said, using Chuck's formal name as teachers did in those days, "would you mind holding this guitar for a moment?" Chuck looked up, surprised to be singled out. He wasn't known as a particularly musical student. He sang in the church choir, like most young men in his community. But that was more about family obligation than personal passion. "I don't know anything about guitars, Mrs. Davis," Chuck said politely. "That's perfectly fine," Mrs. Davis replied with a warm smile. "I'm not asking you to play it. I just want you to hold it, get a feel for the instrument." Chuck accepted the guitar somewhat reluctantly. It was heavier than he had expected, but as he positioned it in his lap, something interesting happened. His hands seemed to naturally find the right positions, his left hand on the neck, his right hand near the strings. It felt, surprisingly, comfortable. "How does that feel, Charles?" Mrs. Davis asked. "It feels familiar," Chuck said, looking puzzled. "Like I should know what to do with it." Mrs. Davis noticed something that Chuck hadn't. His fingers were unconsciously finding positions on the frets, as if his hands had muscle memory for an instrument he'd never touched before. "Charles, try strumming the strings gently," she suggested. Chuck drew his right hand across the strings, producing a chord that, while not perfectly in tune, had a musical quality that surprised everyone in the classroom, including Chuck himself. "That's interesting," Mrs. Davis said, her teacher's instincts telling her that something unusual was happening. "Charles, without thinking about it too much, just let your fingers move on those frets and strum again." What happened next was the moment that changed everything. Chuck's left hand began moving along the neck of the guitar, his fingers finding positions that created different chords, different sounds. He wasn't thinking about music theory or proper technique. He was simply responding to something he heard in his head, some internal musical logic that guided his movements. He strummed again, and this time the sound was recognizably musical. Not professional, not polished, but definitely intentional, purposeful musical. The classroom, which had been filled with the typical low buzz of students not entirely focused on the lesson, became completely quiet. Everyone was watching Chuck Berry, the quiet senior who fixed radios and helped with car engines, as he instinctively found his way around a guitar. "Charles," Mrs. Davis said quietly, "keep going." Chuck continued exploring the guitar, his confidence growing with each chord he discovered. His right hand developed a rhythm, a steady strumming pattern that gave structure to the sounds he was creating. His left hand began moving more deliberately, finding chord progressions that sounded right to his ear. And then, without planning it, without thinking about it, Chuck Berry began to sing. It wasn't a song anyone recognized. It was something Chuck was creating in real time. A simple melody that fit the chords he was playing. Words that came from somewhere deep in his musical instincts. "Got a feeling in my fingers. Got a rhythm in my soul. Never knew I had this music, but it's taking control." The improvised song lasted maybe 2 minutes, but in that time, everyone in the classroom witnessed something extraordinary. The birth of a natural musician. Someone who had never studied music, but who understood it at a level that couldn't be taught. When Chuck finished, the silence in the classroom was profound. His classmates were staring at him with expressions of amazement, and Mrs. Davis was looking at Chuck as if she had just discovered a rare treasure. "Charles," Mrs. Davis said slowly, "have you ever played guitar before?" "No, ma'am," Chuck replied, still looking somewhat confused by what had just happened. "I've never touched one before today." "Have you had any musical training? Piano lessons? Music theory?" "No, ma'am. Just church choir, like everyone else." Mrs. Davis was experienced enough as a teacher to recognize genuine talent when she saw it, and what she had just witnessed was beyond talent. It was a natural musical instinct that was extraordinarily rare. "Charles, I want you to take this guitar home," Mrs. Davis said. Chuck's eyes widened. "Ma'am, I couldn't. This is the school's guitar." "The school has one guitar for 800 students," Mrs. Davis replied. "It's not doing anyone any good sitting in my supply closet. But in your hands, it could become something special." Chuck looked around the classroom at his fellow students, many of whom were nodding encouragement. He looked back at Mrs. Davis, who was smiling at him with the expression teachers get when they know they've just changed a student's life. "But what if I break it?" Chuck asked. "Charles, you just proved you understand this instrument better than most people who've been playing for years. I'm not worried about you breaking it. I'm excited to see what you're going to do with it." Chuck Berry carried that guitar home that afternoon, and his life was never the same. Within a week, Chuck was spending every spare moment playing. He developed a practice routine, an hour before school, another hour when he got home, and longer sessions on weekends. He taught himself to tune the guitar by ear, learned to change strings, and began exploring the musical possibilities of the instrument with the systematic approach he brought to everything he did. But more than technical development, Chuck was discovering his musical voice. He began incorporating elements from the different types of music he heard around him. The blues his father played on the radio, the country music that came from Nashville stations, the gospel music from church, and the pop songs that were popular with his classmates. What made Chuck Berry different from other young musicians was his approach to the guitar as both a rhythmic and melodic instrument. While most guitarists focused on either rhythm or lead playing, Chuck instinctively understood that the guitar could do both simultaneously. Within a month of that first day in music class, Chuck was performing for his family and friends, creating songs that combined different musical styles in ways that no one had heard before. His younger siblings became his first audience, and they were amazed at how quickly their quiet older brother had transformed into a confident, charismatic performer. Chuck's parents, Henry and Martha Berry, recognized that something significant was happening. They had always known Chuck was intelligent and mechanically gifted, but this musical development was something entirely different. They began saving money to buy Chuck his own guitar, so he could return Mrs. Davis's instrument to the school. Mrs. Davis, meanwhile, was following Chuck's progress with the pride of a teacher who had recognized and nurtured genuine talent. She began inviting Chuck to play for other classes, and word of the young musician spread throughout Sumner High School. The first public performance came in November 1944, at a school assembly. Chuck had been playing for only 6 weeks, But when he took the stage with Mrs. Davis's guitar, something magical happened. He performed a song he had written called School Day Blues, a humorous, upbeat number about the trials and tribulations of high school life. The song was an immediate hit with his fellow students. It combined the musical sophistication Chuck had developed with lyrics that spoke directly to their shared experiences. But more than that, Chuck's performance style was electric. He moved with the music, engaged with the audience, and played the guitar with a confidence and flair that was completely natural. After the assembly, Chuck Berry was no longer the quiet senior who fixed radios. He was the school's guitar player, the young man who had discovered he could create music that made people feel happy, excited, and connected. The transformation extended beyond just musical ability. Chuck's confidence grew in all areas of his life. His academic performance improved, his social interactions became more comfortable, and he began to see possibilities for his future that he had never considered before. By the spring of 1945, Chuck was performing at local venues around St. Louis, church events, community gatherings, and small clubs that welcomed African American performers. Each performance taught him something new about connecting with audiences and developing his craft. The guitar that Mrs. Davis had handed him in October became the foundation for everything that followed. Chuck eventually bought his own instruments, but he kept that first guitar for the rest of his life, often referring to it as the guitar that started everything. Years later, when Chuck Berry had become famous for songs like Johnny B. Good and Roll Over Beethoven, he would often tell interviewers about that October day in Mrs. Davis's music class. "I had no idea I could play music," Chuck would say. "Mrs. Davis just handed me a guitar and told me to hold it. But the moment I touched those strings, it was like I'd found something I'd been looking for my whole life without knowing I was looking for it." Mrs. Davis, who continued teaching at Sumner High School for another 20 years, always considered Chuck Berry's discovery to be one of her greatest achievements as an educator. She kept newspaper clippings of his success and would tell her students about the importance of being open to discovering hidden talents. "You never know what you're capable of until you try," she would say, holding up Chuck Berry's picture. Charles Berry was just a quiet student interested in fixing things. But when he picked up that guitar, he discovered he could fix more than just engines. He could fix people's moods, bring them together, make them feel joy. The guitar Chuck took home from school that day, in 1944, became the instrument on which he developed the playing style that would influence rock and roll for decades to come. The distinctive Chuck Berry sound, the combination of rhythm and lead playing, the incorporation of different musical styles, the focus on songs that told stories, all began with those first experimental moments in Mrs. Davis's classroom. In 1986, when Chuck Berry was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, he dedicated his acceptance speech to Mrs. Davis, who had passed away several years earlier. "There are teachers who teach subjects, and there are teachers who change lives," Chuck said. Mrs. Julia Davis did both. She handed an 18-year-old kid a guitar and told him to see what happened. "What happened was that I discovered who I was supposed to be." Today, music educators around the world tell the story of Chuck Berry and Mrs. Davis as an example of the importance of exposing students to musical instruments, regardless of their apparent interest or natural ability. The lesson is that talent can exist in unexpected places, and sometimes all it takes is putting the right tool in the right hands at the right moment. Sumner High School, which became an integrated school after desegregation, now has a music program with dozens of instruments and serves hundreds of students. A plaque in the music room reads, "In memory of Mrs. Julia Davis, and the day she handed Chuck Berry his first guitar, October 12, 1944. Sometimes greatness begins with a simple invitation to try." The story of that October day reminds us that life-changing moments often come without warning. In ordinary settings, through the simple act of someone believing in potential they can see even when we can't see it ourselves. Mrs. Davis saw something in Chuck Berry that Chuck didn't even know existed, and her willingness to hand him that guitar changed the course of popular music forever. Every time you hear a Chuck Berry song, every time you see a guitarist playing rhythm and lead simultaneously, every time you experience music that combines different styles into something new and exciting, you're hearing the echo of that moment in 1944, when a teacher handed her student a guitar and said, "Let's see what happens." If this incredible story of discovery and the moment that launched rock and roll history moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with any teachers who believe in their students' hidden potential, and any musicians who remember the first time they picked up an instrument. Have you ever had a moment when you discovered a talent you didn't know you had? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing stories about the moments that changed music history forever.